Greetings, fellow beings.
Hey guys, first off, I'd like to say thank you for your interest. I know it's been a while since I posted any stories, but I've got a lot coming up. After seeing the interest and hearing from a few of you, I've been motivated to give you guys some more. As an attempt to make up for my lack of commitment, I'm going to do my next subject in a small mini-series of 5 videos this week. So, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all week long. Now, normally I try to put what I think are the best stories at the end of the videos. However, this week I'm just going to kind of build up in themes, and each day is just going to kind of have a different theme. And then on Friday, although they may not be the best, I am going to do my own personal stories. I do have a few that have to deal with this week's phenomenon. So I can't speak on the behalf of all the other stories I've read for this series, but I can wholeheartedly say that my accounts are as true as can be. Whether it be that my mind was playing tricks on me or something more than that, I swear by my words that the experiences were genuine to me. Now, with this intro being so long, I'll try to keep the rest this week really brief, and thank you so much again for being patient. So, without further delay, how about we take a look
Into the Shadows. Number 13.
I'm excited. I had my first shadow person experience this morning and it caught me off guard. Not that I don't remain skeptical and am confident in the more logical of explanations, but it's also my first paranormal-like experience, or rather the first time in actually seeing an apparition, or more specifically, a shadow person. I always wanted to see a ghost. Most of my life experiences were baffling noises that I couldn't find an explanation for, and things I vaguely remember from when I was little, which that alone I find questionable, or wondering if my memory is false in some way. So anyway, my alarm clock lights up when you hit snooze. Lights up the room well enough to see. This morning I hit snooze and laid there, doing my gradual wake up as usual. I noticed my wife was already out of bed and downstairs. It goes off again. I remained wide awake during this time and confident I'm not in any delusional-like state. I hit it and roll back over, intending to actually get up the third time, but when I rolled over on my back, I could very clearly see a dark shape at the corner of my bed, but I wouldn't have noticed it if I didn't move. Like, I see this silhouette, but I didn't think anything of it other than tricks of the light in the dark. This shape was bent, leaning over my bed, and then suddenly stood up. This movement is what grabbed my attention. It was a full-body figure, tall as me. Head, shoulders, everything was pitch black silhouette against the background. It then turned and moved towards the stairs into the darkness. It happened so fast that I was more shocked than anything. I wish I could review that experience over a couple times to be better prepared to observe. At least I know it's possible to at least visually see something that appears to be a moving shadow, real or not, and is separate from typical hallucinations based on lighting, drowsiness, or hallucinogenics. Usually, when I'm half awake, I'm well aware of what I'm seeing being imaginative or a trick. Back in my youth, I did LSD, etc., and the hallucinations were still obvious because there's never any consistency to just one thing moving realistically or smoothly like that. So if this was all in my head, then there's definitely another level of hallucination that I've not experienced before. Personally, I think it's more likely just that, my brain tricking me, but it's a first for me. My wife and I have lived here for some 7 years. I don't consider my house haunted, but first couple of years we used to hear sounds like someone would come in the front door and move around, often with us swearing someone came in, even in daytime. But they were dismissible, and no more unusual noises since then. I'm hoping I can see or hear something again soon.
Number 12.
The body of this story takes place between August and October of 2009. I was a graphic designer at an agency shortly after I left college. Every day was incredibly stressful. They never knew how to say no to the client and always overpromised and underdelivered. Every project was an emergency. Finally, my then girlfriend, now wife, suggested that I try meditation. I am in no way a religious guy, but I can admit strange and unexplained things have happened outside the realm of which we understand as normal. So I did some minor research and started off with Kundalini meditation and borrowed an album from a coworker to guide me through it. The first time I did it, I was just a little dizzy. There are a lot of breathing methods implemented in most meditations, but Kundalini asks that you do several different types. The next time it was around 3 a.m. This was also to help me sleep. My girlfriend was asleep and I was sitting on the floor in the bedroom by the closet. I could hear my breathing and my girlfriend's breathing, and distinctly the breathing of someone else. My eyes snapped open and I turned around expecting Tina to be standing there. Nothing. I turned back around and was facing the doorway that led into the short hallway. That was where I first saw it. It was human-esque but standing awkwardly, like this is not how it normally stands. It looked like it was struggling to stay on 2 feet. I could not make out details. It was entirely black, not to be confused with an absence of light, but black as a color, and it was standing in a dark hallway. We have a wireless switch for a fan/light, and I hit the light. Nothing was there. The next day I tossed it off as it was late and I was doing those weird breathing exercises. It was just my brain playing games on my overactive and tired mind. I went to work and came home. Tina called and said that she was running late and that she would be home in a few hours. I said I would have dinner ready. The water was boiling with the pasta and the meat sauce and was on a low simmer, and it had gotten dark. I had been playing a game when the timer went off, and suddenly I realized just how dark it had gotten. I went into the kitchen to strain the pasta. This part happens in the blink of an eye. I had that feeling that someone was there, like having your eyes closed and someone holding their hand in front of your face. I freaked out and thought it was an intruder and turned quickly with a knife from the counter. With all of the survival skills I have, I still dropped the knife when I saw it. It was only there until it was in my direct field of vision. It was, again, in perfect lighting, still a totally black spot, not really reflecting any light. Still no details inside the silhouette. I stood for what felt like forever, staring in the space that it had been, possibly still was, and darting my eyes around to the other dark places to make sure I was alone. I did not want to tell Tina about it. A few years before, she had nightly night terrors and would wake up screaming in this horrifying scream. Weeks passed and my hesitation to walk into a dark room passed with them. Eventually, I decided to leave my job because of the backwards work ethics. They were not going to pay for the 2 weeks of off time I had not used. I took the 2 weeks as vacation and decided to give my 2 weeks notice when I got back. It was going to be a staycation. Sleep as long as I can, play games the rest of the day. I would cook dinner and be all around relaxed when Tina got home. About a weekend, I woke up briefly as Tina was getting ready for work, and then I fell back asleep. What I thought was minutes later, something fell off and I opened my eyes. Out of the darkness of the hallway came a figure, like a rigid corpse being thrown at me, flying over me and landing on me. I sat up with a short scream. I was 28 years old at the time of writing this and had been working freelance from home since I left the job in 2009. I have seen what I like to call the Stranger Thing about 10 times. The sightings have not always been at night or inside the house. I have not seen them since earlier 2010, but I have also not practiced any meditation since those first few times. I have done several pieces of artwork based on these experiences and feelings.
Number 11.
When I was a kid living in an old house I grew up in, I occasionally had to sleep in the spare bedroom when my aunt stayed over. I have some very vivid memories of trying to fall asleep, but then I would hear fast, heavy footsteps running down the hallway to my door. Then physically feeling what felt like a tall person standing over me in my bed before grabbing me and shaking and choking me. I was never able to physically stop it, so I had to wait in excruciating terror until it stopped and my fear passed, and I was able to pull the blankets up over myself, which makes me think it might have been some kind of sleep paralysis.
Number 10.
We moved into my house in a small town in Colorado in 2001. I was in the first grade. I was probably 11 when I saw him for the first time. A shadow-like man standing in my parents' doorway, staring out into the hall. There is no indication that he is actually a male, but that's the vibe he always gives off. Very masculine. I used to see him all the time, but now I don't look. That was disconcerting, but I chalked it up to an overactive imagination and moved on. I don't remember how old I was. This may have been before I started seeing him, in fact. I was a horrible insomniac as a child. One night, I was trying to sleep when someone began to bang on my door. Loud, full-fisted pounding that shook the door frame. There was no pattern, just random banging, and I was terrified. After about an hour of this, I had managed to work up enough courage to open the door. I crept across my room as the knocking continued. I grabbed the doorknob and pulled. Nothing. Nobody there. My parents, in the bedroom next to mine, were fast asleep, and they hadn't heard a thing. A number of things happened to me in my sophomore year. I vividly remember going to the bathroom around midnight, did my thing, washed my hands, and walked in the hall back to my room. As I neared my door, I accidentally shoulder-checked someone who was significantly taller than me. I was probably about 5'9" or so. I apologized and shut my door. After it closed, I realized that everyone was asleep. I was the only person awake in the house. The last really major thing happened a few months after the bumping incident. In the summer, my door swells up and becomes very difficult to open from either side and is impossible to open and close quietly. One night, around midnight, I got up to go to the bathroom. My door crashed open and it scraped closed. Upon my return, it crashed open and scraped closed. Nothing unusual. I got into bed, began considering falling asleep when my door opens silently. I see a head poke around the door, the head of the man who stands in my parents' bedroom. We stare at each other for a few moments. Then my door closes silently. Naturally, I jump out of bed, grabbing for my phone. When I shined it in the hall, nobody was there. Once again, my parents were fast asleep. And those are my two main stories. This entity, Shadow Man, doesn't feel dangerous or dark. He mostly just wants to be left alone, I think. And sometimes I hear someone, who I assume is him, walking around the floor of the house that nobody is currently on.
Number 9.
As an intuitive and curious teen, I was heavily involved in Wicca, metaphysics, and the like. I practiced meditation and read all I could into these subjects. One day I decided I was ready to cast a circle. Now, I cast this circle just as the book said, calling the gods, meditating to a deity, offering of food and wine, etc. I had an intense feeling in this circle, like I was definitely doing something right. I was enjoying myself, and time flew by inside that circle, until suddenly I realized it was late and my family was coming home. I blew out my candles and just left the circle. I never bothered closing it. It never dawned on me how important this was until it was too late. So, not soon later, I started seeing this shadow of sorts dodge past my bedroom door, like out of the corner of my eye type thing. And at first, I didn't think anything of it. Then after a while, I started to notice it. He was a tall silhouette of a man with a trench coat and a fedora hat. I mean, I saw it in broad daylight and at night, very often, like every few hours. So I started to pay attention. Now, I know it was not an ordinary shadow or a reflection of light creating this pattern because I lived in that house for years and never seen it before. I want to add that this shadow never gave me a bad vibe. This was odd because usually I'm a coward when it comes to scary stuff. So a few days went on, and I never mentioned anything to anyone. Like, what would I say? I knew my mom would think I'm weird, and so would my friends. I started to imagine that this shadow man was like a guardian for me, and I almost felt more secure with its passing. Over the weekend, I had my friends over, and we were up in my room, and I was standing by my TV putting in a movie, and they were just sitting behind me on the couch. And there goes my shadow man again. I turn, look at it, acknowledge it, and continue to fix the DVD player. I turn around to my friends and they are just jaw dropped, like they seen a ghost. And my one friend says, your house is haunted. I said, you saw that too? I was so relieved that my sighting was confirmed by others that I'm not crazy.
Number 8.
I've also seen a shadow man back when I was in high school. It was a bright full moon night, and we were locking the house down, and I opened the back door and stepped outside to call my cat in. My parents had a one-story house with a flat roof, so it cast a straight shadow on the yard. I saw the shadow of a man standing on the roof projected onto the yard. With all the moonlight, its shadow was darker than the shadows on the ground. I ran back inside and tell my dad to grab a gun. Someone is on the roof. He grabs his 1911 and we flip on the light. Nothing. Nobody up there, no noise, nothing. The roof had gravel on it when the cats or squirrels ran around up there, and you could hear them clearly. I know what I saw that night, and the mental images never faded. My parents still joke about it 15 years later when I visit them. I never consider it hostile or negative in any way. It really seems like it was looking around while it was on its way somewhere. The house has a clean history of paranormal activity, and nothing of the like has been seen there since that night.
Number 7.
This happened to me and my mom, but I was only about 5 at the time. I don't remember any of it, and she only told me when I was about 16 or so. My parents were divorced, and my mom and I just lived on our own. It was on a Saturday morning, and my mom was sitting up in bed reading her book while I was downstairs alone watching TV. I do remember living in the house vividly, and it was pretty small. We had one of those staircases that had a bend at the top of it, which led to the upstairs landing with the 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. From my mom's bedroom, you could see the bend of the stairs, but that was it. So anyway, she was in bed reading, and she said that her thoughts got away with her, and she ended up coming to a stop in her reading and just kind of started thinking about stuff. She was looking out of the doorway, and she said all of a sudden she saw a figure, like a shadow, completely black with no features, but it wasn't on the wall. It was a physical 3-dimensional being. She wasn't scared by this though, and she continued to stare up at it. She said it was short, a lot shorter than her, and she's only 5'5", and then it walked up the stairs. This only lasted about 3 seconds, but about a second later she saw the exact same thing happen again. A black shadow walk up the stairs. Still not freaked out, but a little curious, she got out of bed to investigate. My bedroom door was directly at the top of the stairs, so she checked in there first. She checked under my bed and in my wardrobe and etc., but she found and saw nothing. She came down and asked me a few non-leading questions, but I hadn't seen anything at all. My mom is quite into paranormal stuff, but she's never seen anything like this before. She thought it was a cool experience and kind of brushed it off and forgot about it. But we fast forward to later that night when I was in bed, and it was around 9 p.m. I was young and had gone to bed pretty early, and my mom was downstairs watching TV, and she hears me crying. I'm in bed and sobbing my eyes out, and she runs up and is trying to reassure me, assuming that I had a bad dream or something. She says, "It's okay, darling, Mommy's here. It's me. Stop crying, sweetheart." At this point, she realizes that I'm not actually awake. My eyes are open, but I'm in that weird trance-like sleepwalking state. She tries to shake me slightly and is constantly talking to me, but I'm still not awake. I then start saying,
"You're not my mommy. Get away from me. Where is she? Where is she? You're not my mommy."
She's starting to get a bit freaked out now. Still trying to wake me, I then say,
"Look at all the lights. Look at them."
and I start pointing around the room at nothing. My mom is now completely scared and calls my dad and her brother over. She still can't wake me up, and I'm still talking away about something. They managed to get me back, and then back to sleep. And in the morning, I didn't remember a thing, and I didn't say anything. Could my experience have been connected with the shadow person my mom saw? We don't know.
Number 6.
So 2 weeks after my granddad's funeral, I decided to go and stay with my grandma, seeing as she was really lonely. Before going to visit her, I had a dream in which my granddad was standing on top of the stairs next to a white door and asking me to come up with him. But I didn't because I was scared. So I got to my grandma's flat, which is in Soviet blocks. There's different rooms for toilet and bathroom, which is where the corridor is. It's the middle of the night and I decide to go use the toilet. I open up the doors and there's this shadow running out from the toilet to the room my granddad passed away in. What freaks me out about this, it couldn't have been my shadow because the silhouette of it was manly and I'm a girl and was only about 10.
Number 5.
Okay, so this isn't the most interesting or exciting of stories, but it really did happen to me, and I feel like anyone listening to this story will appreciate it. As some background, the house I lived in at the time had a sliding glass door in one of the living rooms, though rarely did it ever see any use. I was sitting at my computer desk at the time of the encounter, which is in the adjacent room connected by a doorless archway, and when you look behind you from the computer desk, you can see part of the sliding glass door before the view is obstructed by the archway. Anyways, I was sitting at my computer desk as per usual when I heard the sound of the sliding glass door opening. So I turned to see who was coming in, and what I saw was a black arm with its hand on the door handle as if it were closing it. I could only see the arm because where the body would have been was obstructed by the doorway. And when I say it was black, I mean it was black. It seemed almost like there was a piece of reality cut out in the shape of an arm, and all that was left was a black void. The arm then withdrew from the handle and went out of sight. I just kind of sat there baffled for a few seconds, and then a thought came into my head that someone might have just broken into my house. So I quickly spring up and go into the next room, and it was completely and totally empty. On top of that, my dogs were sleeping in front of the sliding glass door undisturbed. I checked the adjacent rooms, but couldn't find a trace of whatever it was I saw. I didn't really know what to do at the time, and so I went back to doing what I was doing before that. This is the one and only time I've had an encounter with an entity that I can't explain, and I did live in that house for a very long time, and nothing else out of the ordinary happened that couldn't be explained away by paranoia. I don't really have a rational explanation for this, though. The only thing I can think of is Shadow Person.
Number 3.
First off, this did happen when I was young. I believe I was 3 or 4 at the time this happened. I know that children have occasional hallucinations or have a warped memory of certain events in the future. However, this is one of those things that I believe will be burned in my memory my entire life. I absolutely believe that what I saw was a ghost or some other type of paranormal phenomenon. When I was young, from about 2 to 4, my mom worked at a little coffee shop about 10 minutes away from where I lived at the time. It was named In the Mood, but my mother and I just called it the coffee house. The building was an old church that had been originally built in the late 1800s. Being a church, funerals were held there often. The building had been redecorated, I would hardly call it a renovation, with new paint and furniture. The main area was the actual coffee shop. It was a very large square room with an old wooden stage on the right side of the room. Nothing was too weird in this area, besides the somewhat disturbing paintings and occasional spiders every now and then. For some strange reason, the restrooms were located in the basement. After going down the stairs, you would find yourself in a fairly large room. I can only describe it as a living room type area. To the left and almost directly behind the staircase were a couple of rooms I won't describe besides horrifying to go into. At the other end of the living room from the staircase, there was an entrance to the hallway. To the left side of the hallway, in this order, was the men's restroom, the women's restroom, some sort of storage room where I remember some strange items, and at the end of the hallway was the main manager's private office. To the right, just a potted plant and a painting I remember as creepy. However, at the far right end of the hallway, there was a half flight of stairs and a door. I didn't know this at the time, but the door just led outside to the backyard of the building. I remember prior to this experience asking my mom where that door led, and she just said something like,
That's where the spirits go.
or something of that nature. I think that was a dream, but it is strange how it intertwines with this story. She never let me through that door. At the time of this experience, I was riddled with curiosity as to where it led. I now realize that the reason she didn't let me through that door was because the backyard was fairly hazardous for young children with large rocks, brambles, etc. In the hallway between the men and women's restrooms, there was a ceiling light that lit the hall by the restrooms, and the rest of the hallway to the right was fairly darker. Now for the actual experience. One day, around 3 p.m., I'm guessing, the shop had that late in the day vibe. I asked my mom to come downstairs with me so I could go potty, as I usually did. At the time, my mom was busy doing something with the owner and told me to just go by myself. I looked scared for a moment, and she assured me it was going to be okay. So I slowly went down the stairs and entered the living room, heading straight for the restroom. I used the toilet, washed my hands, all of that. As I was leaving the restroom, about halfway through the living room area, I looked behind my shoulder like most people do when they're convinced of something following them in the shadows, and I saw something strange, but not scary. I oddly wasn't scared at all, and I felt no bad energy radiating from this thing. As an extremely empathetic child, I could often feel what intentions things had. What I saw only mildly surprised me. A disembodied human shadow that was walking towards the door that leads outside. The shadow looked like mine, like a doppelganger of sorts, but it was walking while I was standing still, examining it while the only light source at the time was the light from the hallway, meaning the shadow would have been behind me by the staircase. I tried telling it to stop so I could talk to it, but it just continued walking. I stood there for maybe another 5 seconds before going upstairs and telling my mom what happened. The part I am most confused about is what I actually saw. The shadow had crisp edges and was transparent, like a totally normal shadow. It looked like a person was walking down the hallway without their body. The only stranger detail about this shadow was that it had feet directly against the wall. The shadow didn't bend and distort depending on the light source. I have read about shadow people thinking this is what I saw, but the vast majority of sightings describe a solid, staticky shadow, meaning they aren't transparent and have blurry edges. I haven't read about any ghost sightings that describe a crisp, clear shadow without the person making the shadow.
Number 2. Part 1.
A little background before I get into the story. My family and I used to live with my grandmother about 10 years ago. Her house was originally one of the first built among a field of orange groves in California. It used to be a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom type of deal. Later on, way before I was around, an attachment of 2 bedrooms, a walk-in closet, and a bathroom were added. These were built terribly, I might add. The floors were so hollow that you could hear if anyone was walking around in the house. My room was the first made, and one wall was still stucco, exterior wall texturing. The house is small, by the way. There is only one hallway. Sorry if this is a little drawn out. I want to be as descriptive as possible to give you the best picture. So here's the story. One summer night at around 3 a.m., I was awoken by someone literally marching in the hallway. I had my door open because I was afraid of the dark, and I was 11. And my grandmother's restroom light was on just across the hallway. The light was on because she was partially blind on account of her diabetes. I remember the hall being illuminated by the sea foam colored light and the sound of someone marching loudly but slowly. I sat up pretty pissed off, thinking it was my grandmother stomping about trying to wake everyone up. I stood up as the marching got closer. I was about to tell her to go to bed when it slowly moved in front of my open door. From what I could tell, it was extremely tall. It appeared to be a huge shadow or large puff of smoke shaped like a human. I could see through it as it passed closer to the restroom light. It did not notice me as I stood there in horror. It moved past my grandmother's room, and she screamed out to it, telling it to go away.
Go away!
I watched it disappear into the darkness of the kitchen. At that moment, I booked it into my grandmother's room. She was shaken and told me it wasn't the first time she had seen it, and that it came around when bad things are gonna happen.
Part 2.
Well, I told my mother about it a couple years later, and she said she had seen it too. She said she was home with my 4-year-old brother, and she was painting my room while my brother played with our dog. After a while, she couldn't hear my brother playing outside, and he was gone. She looked frantically around the neighborhood. Behind the house is an alley, and behind that is a busy highway where cars move at about 50 miles an hour, on average. When she got to the highway, my brother was on the center divider holding the dog crying. She ran into traffic and grabbed them. When she returned home, she was shaking and crying. She went into my grandmother's restroom to wash her face. As she looked into the mirror, she saw the large shadow moving slowly behind her in the reflection. She turned around, and it was gone.
Number 1.
I had seen the Hat Man shadow in 2006 outside my bedroom door for about a month or two. I would see him in the day or at night quite often, but never when I was sleeping or in bed. He would lurk back and forth in the hallway leading to my room. I never told anyone, and he never threatened me, so I figured he was cool. Usually, I am a coward, so it's odd that I wasn't scared. I once had friends over when he walked by, and they all saw him too. Well, I have posted about this before, and have since done some research. I recently watched a radio show on Coast to Coast about the shadow people, and although I do not agree with everything they say, I find it amazing that thousands of people have reported seeing him. It was said that this is the most reported paranormal phenomenon in the US since 2010. I have searched for him on YouTube, Google, and Reddit. They all come up with plenty of reports about him. I have read the comments and see that many people describe him as I have seen him. I do not see him anymore, but he did not scare me when I did see him. One thing that does creep me out about all this is that researchers usually ask if something bad happened after he appeared. I did indeed have something very bad happen after I saw him. He stopped appearing once it happened. 2 people I know have seen him, and something bad happened each time. Hey guys, thanks again for listening. So maybe it's not much to go on yet, but what do you guys think about shadow people? Figments of our imagination? Otherworldly beings traversing between the 11 dimensions? Ghosts? Spirits? Aliens? Oh my. If you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and show me the interest that you'd like to hear more. As I mentioned before, this is just part 1 of a series for this week, and it's all leading up to my personal encounters with the shadow being phenomenon in Friday's video. Until tomorrow.
Be aware and keep your eyes open.